Hi there. Welcome to Tech Talk Weekly. I'm Bob from Creation Station. This is our weekly show where we give you three or four, we got a lot more links than that today, stories and get you on your way in about 20 minutes. I'm just going to lead off with the space stuff right up front. So here I'm going to tell you, go subscribe. If you're listening to this live, go subscribe. I have a great guest today. We have our new marketing person, John, who is our camera You explain to us, John. What are you doing
I
for the library system?
I am the new videographer photographer for the Broward County Library System, and I spent much of my career working in live music and in rocket launch photography. So I have a little bit of a special interest and expertise in rocketry.
We have some good stories for that today.
Indeed.
You've been here for all of what, 2 weeks?
Yeah, 2.5.
Yeah, I mean, so really happy to get the new employees on and featured. So thank you for being here.
Happy to be
We
here.
have some really cool, fun, in-depth stories to talk about today. The first one is space. So number one, Starliner is not coming home. Eventually, the empty rocket ship will come home, but the astronauts are stuck up there. Side note, they can vote in November. NASA and the state of Texas have a special little electronic voting booth up on the space station just for the astronauts to vote. They all qualify as the Houston voting district. Can you guess why, John?
That would be the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
There we go. Thank you very much.
What's my prize?
Yeah. And they're supposed to launch another ship tomorrow. SpaceX's the Polaris, which is going to be the very first civilian spacewalk, and it's not going to go up. Why
Not
is
yet.
that not going up, John?
So, unfortunately, this week, a SpaceX Falcon 9 that was launching Starlink satellites suffered an anomaly when landing. So, the satellites were successfully deployed, but when landing, there was an anomaly that the FAA is going to investigate why it wasn't successful. And it's important to note that this booster launched 23 times successfully.
Yeah.
And this is the first landing failure they've had in quite some time.
Over a year.
Yeah.
And
So
they've been launching insane amounts.
they were anticipating a launch cadence of about 150 launches this year. And between this and another second stage anomaly a few months ago, they're probably not on track right now, but still a very reliable vehicle, all things considered.
Yeah. It has been SpaceX has been an amazing story to see how they have overcome their early problems and are really making. They're the launch system now for the planet, effectively. China's got a decent system, but the Soyuz is not really going anymore from Russia, and SpaceX has got everything until the SLS for Artemis and things really gets underway in another 2 years.
So Soyuz is a little complicated. It is a very robust platform, very successful, and they are still doing it, but we're not exactly hitching rides with them anymore. So it's become geopolitically complicated, but technically nothing's changed. And when it comes to China, they do have a really powerful family of rockets, but they have sort of a culture that allows them to put civilians in harm's way. And that definitely, apart from the moral aspect of it, it definitely puts a hindrance on their commercial applications, what companies are going to be willing to launch with them,
and they don't launch as often. Like you said, SpaceX is going to launch 100-something times this year. China's, I think they're at 5. So it's a complicated thing. But we could talk space all day long, but we can't. We shouldn't. We've got some other things. So 2 fun, quick, easy stories before we get into our more geopolitical type things that happened this week. Number one, how much tech do you like in your car, John?
I don't like nearly any of it. I love having cruise control, and Bluetooth has made my life a little bit easier, but overall, I shy away from most tech in my car.
So the picture here is of the new Mercedes-Benz that has replaced the entire dashboard with a giant view screen. There are no buttons, there are no nothing, and it is a nightmare for me. I'm okay with the screens to view things, but I need the buttons too. I need those knobs and dials. I mean, I drive an electric car. I've not driven a gas car since 2014. It is great having all of the nice new modern technologies and everything in there. But my car still has a basic radio button. I can turn the volume up and down, the AC up and down. I can do all those things. You don't need to. There's a new Volkswagen that's coming out without window switches. We've moved so far away from cranks and the little switches on the doors. Now they're not even there. They're going to be touchscreen things on your panel to up, lower, and raise your windows.
To me, I feel like that takes it like a little bit too far. And the same with a lot of this other technology. Having physical buttons, it's kinesthetic. It allows you to keep your vision on the road and not be thinking like, where am I going to push? Because then I'm taking my attention away from the road. So I feel like this is kind of a step away.
If they need to do this, put it on a heads-up display. Put it on a HUD that I can see as I'm driving straight ahead. My wife's car has that for the speedometer and the maps. It's amazing. It's great.
Sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, that's the tech I want. I don't need screens down here. Broadcast it up there for me. The other fun story is robots picking raspberries. Now, everybody here who has had a raspberry before, and I'm really hoping that's like all of our audience, because if you've missed out on raspberries, you're missing out on a pretty good thing. Raspberries are hard to maneuver and pick and do things with because they're very delicate. And so there's a new field worker robot that can go out and pick raspberries faster than humans can with less waste. It's out of the UK. It is amazing. And I do want to point out, let me see if I can get a better picture of that. Here's a picture of the 6 hands of it moving down the path in between the plants, grabbing and snatching the raspberries.
Maybe someday blueberries.
Yeah, blueberries should be another one. But let me see if you can kind of see on this picture here how that hand looks. Because 5 fingers is a bad thing. Are you ready for robots to take over our field work?
Well, I'm ready for robots to take over a number of specific industries, because when it comes to something like this, like, the fingers, pressure points, it makes sense in a certain way, but what it leads the discussion towards is labor rights, whether or not we want to be protecting jobs. And to me, this is the kind of job that we should be automating, because it's a manual labor. These farms are struggling because they can't afford to pay people with inflation. So it creates this dynamic where maybe we should be automating certain jobs so that people can focus on more important tasks.
And more artistic tasks.
Exactly. Like, we shouldn't be automating our art. We should be automating our labor so that people can make more art. And I feel like it's one of those situations where if we do it right and we protect people and their ability to live and provide for themselves or be provided for, then developments like this are a good thing. They help bring us closer to a civilization where people are not struggling so much.
Yeah. And I agree. And I think that part of it is figuring out that where are they? What are they doing? There was a great story on The Conversation, which is another website we feature here every once in a while, that talked about robotic chefs and whether it's a good or a bad thing to have a robot that can always produce a dish exactly the same every single time. And is that good or bad for the artistic chef side of things versus the restaurant side of things?
I think that when it comes to something like McDonald's, a fast food chain, it's fantastic. But then again, it's two-pronged, because is the product going to suffer? No, it's McDonald's. What are you going to ruin about it? But when it comes to the labor element of it, that's basically a minimum wage job.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can have robots doing jobs like that, we're not subjecting people to somewhat dangerous labor for
Yeah.
poor wages. We can just let a robot do it, and McDonald's makes their money, and we can focus on providing for people in more effective ways, because jobs, as we see them now, are not always an effective way of lifting people out of poverty.
Oh, 100% agree. And we could do a whole show on universal income pros and cons and everything like that. It would be awesome. And along those lines, weirdly enough, is the story this week about Telegram. So I've got 3 links in the show notes for everybody, so you can go read up on this. I'm going to give you a brief nutshell first. Telegram is a messaging app, very much like WhatsApp or iMessage or Signal or anything like that you're using to talk back and forth with people. Then the trick becomes you can be encrypted on there or non-encrypted. If you don't intentionally turn it on, you're not encrypted. The person who, Pavel Durov, is the CEO of the company, or the founder of the company, and he is very much a free speech advocate, strict advocate for it. So that's the nutshell about what this is and how this has happened. Earlier this week, over the weekend, he landed in France. He is a French citizen. He landed in France. He was arrested for failure, which nobody knew about the first couple of days. And after it's all come out, and as of today, we know he was arrested because his company has refused to follow subpoenas and requests for information, for non-encrypted information on his networks for child pornography and other violations of EU and French law. Put 3 stories in there because this is a complicated story that is nowhere near ending. We're going to talk about this again in a couple of months when all the lawsuit things go on. But John, give me your first take after seeing all the chaos of this story breaking over the last few days. Tell me about this. Tell me what you think about it.
So it goes back to what you're saying about, like, we're going to be talking about this for weeks or months. We're probably going to be talking about this for a generation, because we're also still talking about it when it comes to Elon Musk with X. All of this juggling between the concept of free speech and the application of censorship, and especially when it comes to criminal activity. Because if you have something like child pornography, no, you got to deal with it. That's that's an egregious kind of circumstance. But at the same time, how do you punish people who use these platforms for bad like that without also encroaching on the free speech of everybody else? And then does the platform actually support that, or does it moderate through a bias? How do you actually protect free speech? And does the company actually even need to? Who's beholden to free speech? Does the company need to protect it?
Well, and in that case there, that's where Telegram has fallen afoul of the law, because EU law says if you are a very large company, which means 45 million users or more in the EU, you fall under a certain set of rules, and Telegram is refusing to turn over their user data because they don't want the user numbers, not actual information about their users, but just how many people are using the platform, because they don't want to follow those other rules. And one of the things that they're run afoul of in French law was, you just have to give us this. We know, here's the criminal person. Here's the stuff that's on your platform. You have to moderate it. They only have, it turns out, we know now, they have 30 people running this, engineers running this company, which means they have zero moderation, which is, again, against EU law. So they have to moderate, because you are an X amount size company. You have to moderate, and they're just refusing to moderate. Where do you draw a line like that?
I think that it's also extra tricky when it comes to something like Telegram, where in a certain sense it's peer-to-peer communication.
Yeah.
And then
and
it's like we're
that's
talking
their
about
biggest
reading
right?
mail.
Yeah, that's their biggest problem. Because if you and I were on Telegram together and we're talking peer to peer, we can be encrypted. And then Telegram is protected. They do not have to give up our information. We are protected. Nobody else knows what we're talking about. We can geek out on space all we want and nobody has to know about it. My wife would be happy to not have to listen to me. But as soon as you have it in a non-encrypted fashion, it's just like Facebook or X or many other platforms that if somebody shares that information, it gets taken down pretty fast because it's against the law to do it and it's in the open and people find it and report it and it gets taken down. I am all for encryption. I have tried to get as many of my family and friends onto WhatsApp and Signal as possible because everything is just automatically encrypted and it's done. And just because you're using encryption doesn't mean you're doing anything bad. It just means you're protecting your own privacy.
And your data.
Yeah.
I think that we live in such a strange time for collection of data.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to whether it's marketing or people who are looking to take that data and impersonate you, open accounts in your name, stuff like that. We just live in a very strange time for data privacy.
Yeah. And they are not spying on you. They're not, your devices are not listening to you. They're just taking the basic data that you're giving them anyway. My wife started looking up ads to go to the Galapagos because one of our guests on the monthly show earlier this week talked about going to the Galapagos, and I told my wife, and she's like, oh, and she started looking it up. And immediately, a half hour later, I'm getting ads for Galapagos on my phone because we're both in the same network.
Yeah.
And it's just like, this is how this works.
What's interesting to me is that as much as you want to fear like this idea of like, oh, they're always listening and this and that. Yeah, but they're just trying to sell stuff. Like it's a lot less nefarious than you might expect. And I still think it's pretty wrong, but it's so much more innocent than like some Orwellian kind of concept. They're really just trying to sell you stuff.
Yeah. That's why I trust some companies over others, because I can identify, hey, you're trying to sell me stuff. If you're trying to track all my data and I don't know what you're doing, then I'm more worried about you.
I become less likely to buy that product.
Yeah. And apps. So this is one of the weirdest stories about apps and controversy and going to war in effect. And so Rest of World, as anybody who listens to this show should know, it's a great website to get a perspective on things outside of the Western Hemisphere. And so there was an issue at a beauty contest. And South Africa and Nigeria were competing, had an issue, and so they were residents of both countries were kind of jawing back and forth at each other on social media. And then Bolt, which is a ride-sharing app, very much like Lyft or Uber here in the United States. Tell us, John, this is just chaos.
The chaos unfolds when it becomes no longer about the pageant. Like the pageant is almost secondary in the story about the pageant, because what it really becomes is rivalry between these two countries that already have, these socio-political issues between them. But then this strange almost fiction of the pageant riles these people up.
If you wrote this into a story, people would be like, no, that couldn't happen. And so basically, for everybody should go read the story. It's great, very well written. Effectively, what started happening was people in South Africa decided to book rides on ride-sharing apps in Lagos, up in Nigeria, in all the capital cities and all these places, and started taking up all of the slots for ride sharing, even though they were not even inside of the country, forcing surge pricing, etc., and those things to happen. And then it caught on. People in Nigeria figured this out and started doing it to people in South Africa, and Cape Town and Johannesburg started going through the roof. And the apps all had to shut down and say, no, stop. we cannot have effectively having a war by app between these two countries because it's ruining the experience for everybody, and nobody can get anywhere because you can't get a ride anymore.
That, and it harms the livelihoods of the drivers. It harms the people who are trying to get a ride financially. Now they're paying for the surge pricing. So it does so much harm that has nothing to do with the pageant.
Yes.
That's what's so weird to me, is that it's no longer about the pageant.
I'm
It's
much
taken on a
happy
life of its own.
with this kind of warfare than actual guns and bullets and bombs and everything. That we've made progress, maybe, but still, I'm reading this story and I'm just like, what are we doing, folks?
It ends up playing as a comedy.
Yeah, I'm like, for the most part, it has all calmed down. They've done some geofencing so that you can't be in another country and book rides in Nigeria right now. Same thing for South Africa. So it's been an interesting little ride. And if you don't read websites like this, you would never know about it from here in the United States.
Yeah, it's something that, for the most part, does not affect Americans at all,
Yeah.
other than like, oh, I know Uber, I use that. But at the same time, it has applications that, what if something like this were to start happening here? You just never know. These apps can be weaponized to do some really strange stuff.
Weird things. Thank you for being here on a weird day with me, John.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
If let me throw up our final slide here for our day. If there is a library or librarian you'd like to see featured on the show one day, creationstation@broward.org comes right to me. And we'll see you next week. Have fun, everybody.